Hey guys, welcome to Code Tech Talk. My name is Carlos Cucalon, and this is part 2 of the responsive navigation series. Now what we're going to do is we're going to focus on the CSS. If you have missed part 1, please look at the description below and you'll see the comments on how to get to the first part, where we actually worked on the HTML and explain different elements within the page before we're actually gonna go in now and actually create the navigation styles themselves. So this is what we have right now, just with the basic CSS that we have created here and that I provided for you guys. And now what we're going to do is we're going to start adding some other CSS elements to select the navigation elements that we have created. So again, what we're trying to accomplish is this navigation right here, using the drop down, be able to open up, close up, all these things right here. So let's go ahead and create this navigation and start adding styles to our CSS. So in our CSS file that I provided, you'll see that I have different styles here, from fonts, declarations to box sizing, some CSS variables here, some of typography elements that are being added to the page, just so that it's not bare blank. So feel free to use these and to use them for your projects. If you have questions, feel free to add them to your comments, to the comments below, and I'll be glad to help answer any questions that you may have. So let's go ahead and start setting up our CSS declarations. So the first thing that we're going to look is, again, we're going to look at our HTML, and the first element that we're going to select is going to be our nav. Since this is an HTML5 element itself, it doesn't have to use a dot for a class or a pound for an ID. So we're just going to declare the nav here. And then we're also going to be declaring all the different elements inside of the page. So the first one that we have here is going to be Nav Bar brand. So let's go ahead and set that up as well. Let me go ahead and click a couple returns just so that we have enough space here. And you guys should be able to see my screen. All right. Perfect. So let's go ahead and we're going to set up our nav. So anchor tag Navbar brand. That's going to be our logo right here. The next thing that we're going to set up is going to be our button right here on the right, which is going to be our Navbar toggler. So let's go ahead and set that up. So nav button Navbar toggler. One of the things I want to talk real quick as before we continue is that you'll notice that I usually use my root element, which is going to be nav, and then I'm going to start building up. The reason why I do this is because the more that you select, or the kind of the cascade that you offer from one element to the next, it creates a better selector, so that you make sure that you only select that element. So for example, in the future, somebody else comes and creates an anchor tag with a class of Navbar brand inside of the page for whatever reason, then you know that your navigation styles will not be affecting the rest of the page. The only thing that you're selecting is going to be the Navbar brand inside of your navigation. So it's always good to try to be as specific as possible anytime that you're setting up your CSS. Okay, so now that we have that, so we're using Navbar or nav button Navbar toggler. So we have that element. And the next thing that we're going to do is going to use the div where we have the navigation, which is going to be the Nav Bar Collapse. And pay attention that I'm not actually using this ID, because the reason why I'm not using that ID is just in case you change that in the future for your own project. I want to make sure that it doesn't affect the styles. This ID is mainly going to be used for when we're using our responsive navigation using JavaScript to open and close it. So let's go ahead and select our Nav Bar Collapse here. So let's go ahead and set that up. Nav Bar Collapse. Okay. Now that we have these elements, we can go ahead and start styling them a little bit. We're going to use Flexbox to be able to style our navigation. So the first thing that we're going to set up is going to be our parent and children element. So our nav element itself is going to be a parent for all the different elements inside of itself. So the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to display, click and select a display and set it up as flex so that it becomes a flex parent element. You see that things started moving already on the right hand side. And our flex flow, because I do want them to be kind of in a row here, right? So you have the logo on the left, and then you have the toggler on the right, and then you have the drop down or the main navigation right below it. So what we're going to do is, again, it's still going to be a row. So let's go ahead and set it up as row wrap. And then what we're going to do is going to be set up our justify content. And what we're going to do is use space between. Space between is what allows us to have the logo on the left and the navigation on the or the toggler on the right. You'll see how we're going to fix this actual menu to move it right below it as we're working on this going forward. So the next thing we're going to do is we're going to set up align items, and this is going to be center. And then we're going to do align content, and we're going to say flex start. The reason why I set up a center is because I want my brand with my toggler here to be aligned in the middle. And then once we move this down, then you'll see how it actually works, and it'll work just like what we have up here. So then you have this kind of aligned towards the middle, and then you have this kind of moving towards the bottom. So then the next thing that we're going to do is let's just go ahead and add a little bit of padding. You'll notice that our brand is kind of touching our border of the screen. The same thing for the right. So let's go ahead and add a little bit of padding. And then we're going to use our trusty calc. So we're going to call it 1 REM, and then we're going to divide it by the golden ratio, which is 1.618. If you want to divide it or create a different kind of padding, feel free to do that. If you have questions on how to use calc, I created a video and I'll put it on the description below so that you can check it out and maybe be able to practice it. So we're going to use padding calc 1 REM and then divided by the golden ratio. And then let's go ahead and add a little bit of a background color here. So let's go ahead and do background color, and let's go ahead and set up use one of our variables that we have up here. So if you scroll all the way to the top, you'll see our root selector, and then we have light gray. That's what we're going to use for our background color here, so that we're making standardized. If you need for me to maybe explain a little bit more about variables, feel free to leave a comment below, and I'll look forward to creating a video to explain what CSS variables are. It's really nifty. So we're going to set it up as bar light gray, and then save that, and then you'll see that there's a minor change in the background color here. So now we have set up our parent element, which is our navigation. The next thing that we're going to do is we're actually going to start setting up some styles for the brand, for the toggler, and then for the actual navigation itself. So for the brand, let's go ahead and we're going to change this. So for example, right now you see this showing as branding. Maybe it's not branding for you, but maybe it's the name of your business. I don't know, something like Code Tech Talk. And then you save that. So if styles were not to be there, then you at least will be able to see the name of the business or the name of the company you're trying to style for. I see a lot of people using images directly as a logo, but I always suggest against it, because usually a user, especially with a disability, may not be able to hear or see what the name of the brand is. So it's always good to have that option available. So what we're going to do is we're actually going to overlay the image as a background, and then we're going to move the text of the branding itself to the left. So what we're going to do, first of all, since this is a flex element children or child, let's go ahead and give it some properties. So let's go ahead and set it up as flex so that we can affect its width and height. So let's go ahead and we'll allow it to grow 1 and to reduce 1, and maybe we want it to be 70% of the space here. And just by doing that, you see how things arrange over. Let's go ahead and also give it a max width just to make sure that it doesn't really grow more than that, just in case. And then let's go ahead and set up our background image here. Okay, if you notice within our image folder, I created a Fubla logo, and then that's what we're going to use. I actually used it as an SVG. One of the reasons why I like using logos as SVGs is because it allows for the logo to grow as much as you want it to without pixelations, which is something that you definitely get when you use a JPEG, and you would also get it when you use a PNG or a GIF. So I always suggest, if you want to make sure that your brand stays sharp, to use an SVG if at all possible. So let's go ahead and set up our URL. Since we have to navigate from our CSS folder to our image folder, we have to go one root folder up, and then we're going to select our image folder, and then we're going to call our logo called Fubla logo.svg. Okay, then we're going to set it up as no repeat, because we don't want the logo to repeat over and over again. We want it to be position 0, 0, so the top left. And then we're going to use the background sizing element that we have here. So we're going to use contain so that we make sure that it stays within its place, and then make sure that we don't have any background color behind it. If you notice, as we save that, then that showed up here. We see that. However, and if you notice, when we hover over, it's clickable here. But what we need to do is we need to, first of all, get rid of this and maybe give it a little bit more space, because it looks a little bit cramped in there. So what we're going to do is we're going to set it up as display block, and then we're going to give it an overflow hidden, which is going to make it so that it grows and expands as much as the width and the height that we're going to provide for it. Then we're going to give it a width of 100%, and then we're going to give it a height of 3 rem so that it has some responsiveness to it. And then here's where the magic happens. We're going to go ahead and get rid of that branding, and what we're going to do is use text indent, and then negative 9999999 pixels. We want it to go as far away as from our window as possible. And if you notice, as we save that, it got rid of our logo right there. And then we wanted to give a little bit more space between the logo and the navigation, so we're going to give it a margin bottom of 1 rem. If you need for me to explain more about rems or ems or any other units of measurements in CSS, please feel free to leave a comment below, and I'll go ahead and do that for you guys. Now, the next thing that we need to do is now it's going to be style our button. Now we've done our main navigation or logo. Let's go ahead and style our button. To style our button, let's go ahead and first give it a background color. And we're going to use another one of our variables, and this one is going to be the primary color. And as we save it, you see that the element, the button itself changes. You see that we have this kind of gray element or border around it. So let's go ahead and remove that border. So 0, none, so that we get rid of that border. Let's make it a little bit bigger, give it a little bit more size to it. So let's go ahead and give it a padding. And again, I'm using the same calculation that I was using before, which is the 1 em over divided by 1.618, which is the golden ratio. So that's going to be for our top and bottom. And then I do want to give it a 1 em for our left and right. And then, of course, we want our size to reflect that. So let's make sure that we use our font size of 1 em. And then cursor, let's go ahead and make sure that we use pointer. So if you notice right now, when we move our cursor right above the button, nothing happens. So we're trying to just so that people have a visual of what that this is clickable. So let's go ahead and when we save this, check this out. When we save this, now you can see that when you hover over, you have this finger or showing that you can click on it. The next thing that we need to do is that dark black color behind it. It doesn't look quite well. So let's go ahead and change that color for the text itself. And let's go ahead and use another one of our variables, and I called it white. You can see all of those variables right up here. So we have primary color overlay, secondary color overlay, dark gray, light gray, black, white. One of the things, the reason why I like doing this is because if I change the primary color here, say for example to something like 13, you'll see that this change automatically everywhere else that I have declared that primary color on. So I change it in one place, changes everywhere else, trying to be as efficient as I can. So now that we have styled our navigation toggler, let's go ahead and now start styling our main navigation. So for our main navigation, since it's a child of a flex element, which is going to be the nav element, let's go ahead and make sure that it expands as much as it can. So let's go ahead and use flex 100%, and then of course a max width of 100%. And now we make sure that this actually expands the full width of this element right here. And you can see that, for example, if we set a background color of red, you'll see that it expands as much as it can. Again, you do have this little gap right here because we set up a padding right on the top of the navigation itself. So let's go ahead and get rid of that background color so that we can continue styling the page. So now that we have done the following. We have done the nav. We have done the Navbar brand, we have done the button, right? And then we have done also this main element right here. Now what we're going to do is we're going to start styling the menu itself. So this on order list, and then we're going to go down the list to style this over. There may be times that I set up a CSS selector, and maybe I don't have anything underneath a CSS selector, but I like to have it there just in case in the future I may need to add something to it. So you might see that at times I may add a CSS selector and then do nothing with it. So just be aware that sometimes happens, at least on the way that I code. And again, because just I like to see that I have those options, and I like to kind of follow up a structure. So the next thing that we're going to do is we're going to style this Navbar Nav, right? So let's go ahead and set that up down here. If we follow what we've done in the past, again, we'll select Nav Bar Collapse, and then Navbar Nav, and then set that up. Since this is our on order list right here, see, Navbar Nav is an on order list. Let's go ahead and get rid of the bullet points as well as the margin and padding that automatically gets set up in any on order list. So let's go ahead and set up our padding to 0, margin to 0, and list style type to none, if I can spell. None. So now that gets rid of it, if you notice that. So we have that set up there. Now the next thing that we're going to select is going to be our nav item, which is going to be our list item here. So just because I don't like to type all that much, let's go ahead and do that. And let's go ahead and do nav item. And right now, I usually don't add padding or anything like that on the list items because I want to be able to click anywhere around where that list item is. So I'm going to keep this one empty. I'm not going to use it. The next thing that we have as far as the selector is going to be our Nav Link. So let's go ahead and select our nav item. Copy, paste that, and then Nav Link. And then here, now we're selecting the anchor tag itself. So here's where I actually like to give it a little bit of padding, a little bit more spacing, and that's what we're going to do first. The first thing that we're going to do is give it some breathing room, and by that, we're going to use padding, and then we're going to use our trusty calc, the 1EM divided by 1.618. Again, because I'm using the golden ratio for my design. If you're not using the golden ratio, then for your line height and whatnot, then feel free to use something different here, and then 1EM. So when we save that, you'll see that this kind of gave it a little bit more space. But if you notice, it didn't give it more space top to bottom, and that's because we haven't made it as a block element. So the next thing we need to do is create it as a block element, display block, and then we're gonna do overflow hidden to make sure that anything doesn't expand outside of that. And then let's go ahead and give it a text decoration of none, because we don't really care for it to have underlines on the navigation itself, because we're going to do something different. If you look at here, we're going to actually make it so that it hovers over and then it actually shows that way on the page. So if we go here, let's go back and let's go ahead and set this up. Now we have the Nav Bar or Nav Link. Okay. And then what we're going to do is let's go ahead and continue styling the rest of the page before we start adding colors and whatnot. So the next thing that we have is going to be our nav item drop down. So we have that element right there. So let's go ahead and select it. So what we're going to do is we're going to use this other selector that we had here. Again, if you look at it, I have nav item, and then without any space, I added another dot drop down. That's because there's two independent classes that were added. So we have a main class and then a class modifier. So our main class is our nav item and our class modifier is going to be the drop down. That's why we have them together without any spaces in our selector. Just like what we did up here to this nav item, we're not really going to do anything with it. The next thing that we're going to add a style to is probably going to be our drop down toggle, so that we have something to select here. So let's go ahead and we're going to add that. Let's go ahead and select that right now. We're probably not going to do much with it. I'll show you what we're going to do in just a little bit. Nav Link. Now, one thing that you'll see is that even though we have this drop-down toggle, let me go ahead and give it a background color of something like red. You'll see that we have that, but it already has the padding around it. It already doesn't have the underlined text and whatnot. Again, because we do have our primary selector is going to be Nav Link, which is coming here, right? Then all of these styles are already applied. The drop-down toggle and modifier, it just gives it something else, so that if we wanted to add a different style to it, then we could add it to our CSS. But in our case, again, I'm trying to keep it very minimum in the beginning, and then we're going to go ahead and add more styles going forward as we continue. So the next element we're going to select is going to be our drop down menu, and that drop down menu is part of our nav item drop down. So nav item drop down menu. So that's what we have right here. If you notice here though, this is also an on-order list. And what we're going to do here is also going to get rid of the margin or the padding, and also get rid of the on-order list that we have here. So let's go ahead and do padding 0, margin 0, and then list style type none. And then you'll see that it gets rid of those selectors right here. However, CSS, one of the great things about CSS is that it allows you to cascade or take down things that are on top, and it should cascade down to elements that you have below. So instead of having to write things over and over and over again, if you notice these right here, properties and attributes that we set up to these elements are the same properties and attributes that we added up here. What we can do is just combine them. So what we're going to do is under our Nav Bar Nav, we're just going to give it a comma and select our element in there, and then we're just going to get rid of this. Again, trying to work a little bit smarter rather than harder. So in our Nav Bar and Nav, we remove the padding, margin, and list style type. In our drop-down menu, we did the same. So let's go ahead and combine those two in the same place. Okay, the next thing that we're going to do is going to select our drop down item, which is going to be very similar over here. So let's go ahead and select our drop down menu, create the selector. Okay. And again, that's going to be our list item, which I don't really do much styling to. Again, I leave it there just in case we do decide to select or do something with it, but I don't necessarily do something to select those elements themselves. So the next thing that we're going to select is going to be our drop down. If I could spell, and good thing we caught it here. So drop down link. So let's go ahead and select our drop down link. And again, in our drop down link, I wanted to have kind of the same style as we have on the top and main navigation itself. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to kind of piggyback on the styles that we have set up on our Nav Link. So let's go ahead and do that here. And when I save it, these drop down links have the same styles. Now later on, we're actually going to set up different colors and stuff for the drop down links. As you can see on our example, we have a different color for our drop down links as we hover over, and even the color itself on the text. And we're going to create specific selectors just for that. Okay. And then I think those are our main selectors that we're going to be using for our application here. So now let's go ahead and add a little bit more style. So this is just, if you notice as I'm working through this, you'll see that I'm working kind of going for a big approach, and then now I'm going to start refining the approach as far as all the different styles that are going to get added to the page. So I always recommend work kind of big to small rather than small to big, because when you work small to big, you'll find out that if you, for example, change the background color, maybe you made this drop down link a specific padding, but later on you wanted to make it the same padding as the other one so everything looks uniform, then it kind of takes longer. So it's better to kind of see big picture, small picture, and kind of go into the dots. Big broad strokes in the beginning, smaller strokes as you continue. So the next thing that we're going to do is we're going to add some colors to our navigation. So the first thing that we need to do is, for example, our Nav Link. We're going to create another selector here, and we're going to call it Nav Link. And then here we're going to give it a color, and then we're going to use our variable for our primary color. So then you see those are the colors for our primary. And then, of course, we're going to set up our colors for our drop-down link. And for our drop-down link, we're going to just set up our color for black, which I actually set up as a variable as well, just in case later on maybe we wanted to change it to something different, or maybe a different shade of black. So right now we have this drop-down link. So you see the drop-down links are black, and then the other links are actually just this other blue color. Now, we need to make sure to give the user some kind of visual representation that they have selected or they're hovering over a specific element. So using our CSS pseudo selector for our anchor tags, which is going to be the hover selector, let's go ahead and add that for each one of our elements. So what we're going to do is, again, we're going to select our Nav Link, and then we're going to select our drop down link, and we're going to give it a pseudo selector of hover. And this will help kind of differentiate, and as you're hovering over the elements, they'll give you a specific visual representation of what you're doing, right? So let's go ahead and for our Navbar link, let's go ahead and do a reverse, which is what we're going to do is a background color of our primary color. And then our text color, because if right now we save this, check out what happens. The text disappears because it's the same color as the background. So for our color, let's go ahead and set up one of our variables as well, which is going to be the white. And then if I can spell again, Now when we hover over, now we have that there. And let's go ahead and we're going to do something very similar to our drop down link. So what we're going to do for our drop down link hover is we're going to do a background color. And for our drop down link color, we're going to actually use our variable for secondary overlay. And then for our text, we're going to use color white as well. So now when we hover over the main navigation, then when we hover over the drop down link, there's a little bit of separation between the colors, so it gives you a visual representation of the colors that you're selecting here. Now, if you look at our original code, you'll see that we have this little arrow here, and you'll notice that I didn't add it to our index.html file. You'll see that I don't have anything here that represents that arrow, and the reason why I wanted to do it is so that you don't have to do it over and over again when you create another drop down element. So what we're going to do here is we're going to use CSS to add that arrow right after the word drop down. So the way that you do that is we're going to use another pseudo selector for the word after, which will add that CSS style right after that, and we're going to use Font Awesome to do it. So again, this is using the drop down toggle here, right? Because again, that's where we have the link on drop down toggle. And then we're going to use the pseudo selector called after. And here what we're going to do is we're going to look at Font Awesome. What I did is I actually went to Font Awesome, look for the word caret, and that way I get that caret down. And what we're going to copy is we're going to copy this Unicode that we have here, and we're going to add it to our drop down selector here. So or drop down element right there. So what we're going to do using the after pseudo selector is, first of all, we're going to set up our font family to Font Awesome so that it can select the Font Awesome family. And then we're going to add the content. And the way that we do it is we're going to do content, colon, space, double quote, and then we're going to do a backslash, and then we're going to use the Unicode that we copied over, and then of course close it with a double quote and the semicolon at the end, and that's how we get that to show up here. Again, if we were not to have this Font Awesome font, then you'll have this square kind of showing that that doesn't exist. So we need to make sure that we add that font, and that's why we added it first. And then just to give it a little bit of separation, let's go ahead and give it a margin left of 1 rem, and that way it gives it a little bit of space so that you know that it's part of it, but not necessarily have to be bunched up next to it. If you want to use a different amount or something else, then feel free to do that as well. So right now we already have these set up here for our drop down. If you look at it, it looks just like what we have over here. And that's what we have right here. So that's, again, the solution, and this is what we've been working on together in this lesson. This, again, because we're working mobile first, now we need to start working so that we actually start doing it for tablet and then for desktop. So the next step is to actually start working on tablet. So let's go ahead and create some media selectors. So there were things that we have a breakdown for. It's going to be media, screen, and min width of 720 pixels. And then we can do body, background, color, red. And then our next media selector, which is going to be our desktop, is going to be media, screen, and min width. And it's going to be 960 pixels. That's going to be where we start our desktop. And let's go ahead and give it a body, background, color of blue. I usually use the body background color kind of trick just so that I know as I'm, for example, scrolling over or making the window bigger or smaller, that to know exactly when kind of that effect takes place. And you can also see it maybe up here on the right. Sometimes you'll see that it displays for you. So here you can see that's desktop, and this is going to be our tablet portion. For my tablet, I really don't care if it shows this way. I kind of like it that it opens up and it takes full screen. I might have maybe longer menu items or whatnot. Maybe I can even style for my drop down menus to maybe be kind of like a giant menu, maybe have them kind of go next to each other. But for this case and for this scenario, I'm really not going to do any styles for our tablet, but feel free to maybe design to it and then go for it. If you need any help or support, feel free to leave comments, and then we'll be able to do that and maybe help and show you how to do that as well. But what I'm going to do is I'm not really going to focus on the tablet. I want to keep it the same way. So I went ahead and removed that background color for the tablet portion. So now let's go ahead, and what we're going to do is we're going to move on, and we're going to go into our desktop declaration here. And here what we're going to do is we're just going to start doing some styles so that the desktop version looks just the way that we have our desktop version looking up here. So first of all, let's go ahead and get rid of this body declaration. The next thing that I want to do is I don't really want this gray color as part of the navigation on top. So let's go ahead and I'm going to get rid of that. And that's, if you scroll up here, you'll see that that's part of our nav declaration where we set up our background color to that light gray. So let's go ahead and replace that and go nav and then background color transparent. If you were not aware, for CSS, anything that is towards the bottom would actually override anything that is on top. And that's why we set it up first for mobile, and then we go into desktop because it'll be a lot less changes rather than going from desktop into mobile. Again, I like to always think as doing things for mobile first before moving into our desktop. The next thing that we need to do is let's go ahead and make sure that, for example, that navbar toggler is no longer showing here, right? Because we don't care for that to show here on the desktop version. So let's go ahead and set that up as well. And again, everything that we're doing inside of our media query right here. Navbar toggler, display, none. Okay. Now we got rid of that. The next thing that I want to do is if you look up here to the Navbar brand, you'll see that that one has a 70%, which if we were to look at it or visualize it, let's go ahead and give it a background color of red. You'll see how much space it actually takes. We want to reduce that. And I've already done the calculations for this one. So let's go ahead and we're going to copy this over. We're going to paste it down here. And then we're going to set it up as flex 00 to 138 pixels because I don't want it to be more than 238 pixels. And of course, a max width of 238 pixels as well. So then if we were to give it a background color, you'll see that it now just kind of encompasses this logo itself. The way that I did it is actually right-clicking on it, and then I inspected the element, and as I was going through it, I actually started reducing the size of the element so that I knew how much space I wanted it to give until I found a place where I was kind of satisfied with the results. So that's the way that I did it to find out the specific size and to give it a pixel size rather than a responsive size kind of, percentages or REMs. So I have this Navbar brand. We were able to change that flex and max width. We already hit the menu button itself. And then the next thing that we need to do is we need to make sure that this element right here, which is our main menu, floats right next to our logo. So if you look up here, we actually created this Nav Bar Collapse right? And we give it a flex of 100. So it can grow 1, it can reduce 1, but we wanted the base size to be 100%. So let's go ahead and fix that real quick, because we still want it to be as big as it can possibly be, but we also need to take into account these 238 pixels. So again, we're going to use our trusty calc function for CSS, and that's how we're going to figure it out. So we're going to use flex, and then we're going to do 1, again, grow and reduce, and then, or shrink. And then what we're going to do is we're going to use calc 100% space minus space 238 pixels. Anytime that you use the minus or plus on the calculations, then you need to make sure that you give a space between the two selectors or selectors that you're or units that you're trying to use. If you have them together, kind of like this, then they would actually, the minus will not work. So you need to give it a space so that it actually works properly. Okay, and then we're going to do max width, and then we're going to do calc 100% minus 238 pixels. And then you'll see how now that the navigation actually floated right to the edge of these logo here. Okay. Now that we've done that, now we need to look at the page itself, and let me take a look. I'm trying to figure out where we set this up. Navbar Nav. All right, so we have this right here. So this is our selector, which is going to be our Navbar Nav right here. You see the on order list, which is our main menu. Now what we're going to do is we're going to set it up as a parent for Flexbox. So let's go ahead and do that. And what we're going to do is, again, we're going to set it up as display, flex flow, row wrap, right? So that you see that it's in order. And then we also want it to go to the right so that it gives a little bit more space. So we're going to use justify content and then flex end. And then what we're going to do is align items, flex start. And then we're going to do align content, flex start as well. So now we have these elements right here. And again, this looks a lot bigger, and it's mainly because we have this navigation expanded. If not, then we would actually, it would actually align. So let's go ahead and make sure that we have this drop down menu so that it's no longer expanded and it's actually closed. So let's go ahead and make sure that we have this selector. So I'm going to use this drop down menu here, selector up here, and I'm going to paste it. And then we're going to do display none. And now you see that we have it showing or not showing. And then what we're going to do is we're actually going to give it a position of absolute. And here's what's going to happen. So let's go ahead and bring it back. Display block. When we bring it back and we have a position of absolute, it takes the reference of the drop down element right here, and then it takes its positioning from it. So now here, that's why it shows up right below it. If we didn't have this absolute here, that's why it grows, because again, it makes this other menu itself grow in regards of size. So let's go ahead and bring the position absolute, and then let's go ahead and also give it a background color of, say, for example, the light gray that we had before, just so that we have some kind of separation and kind of see a little bit of separation between the drop down, the main navigation, and this navigation. So what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and hide it, and then it no longer shows. And then using the JavaScript is how we're going to show it. So if you notice, for example, up here, when we're looking at our mobile responsive, it still shows because, again, we only affected our desktop navigation. We didn't affect the tablet or the mobile. So the next thing that we need to do is we also need to go ahead and hide our drop down, and then we also need to go ahead and hide our our main navigation itself, so that we can go back to having a blank slate, kind of what we have whenever we come here on the final solution. So everything is kind of closed, and then when you click on this icon, then it shows up, and then when you click on this drop down, then that's when this other thing shows up. But before then, everything is kind of closed up. So what we're gonna do is, now that we have selected all these elements, right? Now that we have done all the styles that we wanted to do on our tablet, on our mobile, and on our desktop, now we're kind of hiding elements, because the next step is going to be to add our CSS. So again, we are trying to select this drop down menu. So let's go ahead and see if we have a drop down menu selector just for it. If not, then okay, let's take a look at here. That's the drop down bar. Yeah, because we want this to be the collapsible one, not the Navbar Nav. So let's go ahead and we're going to use this drop down menu here. We're going to create another class, and again, that's I'm back on the mobile portion of our CSS, and display none. Drop down menu is now collapse, which again, I'm collapsing this drop down menu here. And the next thing that I want to do is collapse this Nav Bar Collapse. So in order to do that, let's go ahead and add it up here to display none. Now we're back to this. We can't click on it because we don't have any CSS, any JavaScript to make it work, but the JavaScript is actually quite easy to make it show up. Right now it's also not showing up here on the desktop itself, because we have it hidden. So now that's something that we need to go ahead and fix that. So let's go ahead and go back to our Nav Bar Collapse, and now we need to add it to our selector here, and we already have it here. So let's go ahead and add display block, and now we have our navigation back in our desktop. So desktop shows, tablet doesn't, mobile doesn't. So let's go ahead and we're going to stop here. If you need to go back, if you have questions about this, feel free to leave them in the comments below. And what we're going to do is we're actually going to stop here, and then we're going to do a really quick short video showing how we add some interaction using JavaScript or jQuery actually to add some classes to make the elements show and close. And that should be the conclusion of this responsive navigation tutorial. If you have questions, comments, concerns, please feel free to let us know. Feel free to make sure also go look at our GitHub repository to download the files, and that way you can also be hopefully working as we're working together. You're also working on your own computer as well. Feel free to pause and kind of rewind, and if there's anything we can help you grow in your coding skills, feel free to reach out to us. Thank you so much, and I'll see you guys on the third and final video for this responsive navigation. Bye.